Welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings here in Mendham. Okay, maybe too many lions. Yeah, tigers and no bears. But anyway, so I did do a 4-hour live thingy and played the Benatar interview, and it was insightful. I mean, I knew Benatar had backslid from a lot of the things he had previously said, but there was one part where I didn't really realize that maybe in Better to Have Never Been, right? He actually did say that he wouldn't coerce anybody. So he doesn't think, he thinks producing, being a procreator is immoral, that there's a moral reason not to do it. That's the term he uses, immorality. And I would argue it's really, a subject of ethics. But anyway, but he doesn't think it's a crime that you could, like, it's less than littering. You can't fine somebody, you can't discourage it in any way, you can't tax it, you can't do anything to coerce somebody not to procreate. So even if we had a democracy of 70 or 80% of people who didn't think procreation should be reckless and stupid, even, he would say that majority is not allowed to impose or coerce the non-believers, okay, into obedience. So, I mean, obviously every philosophical perspective believes it does have that right to impose its will. Once the vast majority of people say something is wrong, you're not allowed to do it, and that's it. They can ban liquor stores. They can do lots of things. It's just a fact once they have that majority. And we're talking about even a substantial supermajority. Okay, he's saying basically that there's no circumstance that he can contrive or imagine where coercing is legitimate. And that's probably the bigger takeaway. Besides the fact that he says this applies to animals, but he's applying it to animals in the same way he's applying it to humans, in the sense that unless you convince the animals not to procreate, you can't do anything coercive. Okay, so you can't do anything to impose upon them in any way. And so he's useless to this subject, right? I mean, this is just absolute nonsense. This is like somebody saying, I won't rape, but I won't pass a law against rape. I mean, this isn't a person that's going to be very useful to anyone. So this isn't some subject of personal morality, because obviously we, as the victims, don't get here by our own volition. We get here by their volition, by their act. And so that's the only way we can rescue ourselves from the future and extract ourselves from that future, is to oblige these people not to commit this immoral act of procreation. And that's the simple truth of it. So not only is there the duplicity of him saying everything I'm going to say about the human condition includes animals, but he's basically saying everything I'm saying about the human condition is so weak in understanding, I don't believe it, really. I really have no confidence in it. And so what if I'm wrong? That's what he's basically saying. So I just won't bother. So, again, apparently any subject for which there is a dissenter, there's no, we can't have any confidence that they are absolutely wrong. So, it's really quite useless. And clearly, another example of it is, he's basically saying if something is incapable of understanding the subject, then they can't commit a moral crime, therefore they can't be guilty. So he's basically saying if somebody is insane, I can't stop them from committing the crime. I can't coerce them into believing differently, and therefore it's acceptable for them to rape or murder, because they don't know that it's rape and murder. They don't know it's a crime, so therefore they haven't broken the moral imperative or whatever the statement is. So it really just turns ethics into dogma rather than into anything respectable as a reasonable understanding of right and wrong, and the fact that making no choice is going to be likely to be a bad choice. Applying your intelligence is always going to be better than saying, I can't make a decision because I can't be sure I'm right. I mean, yes, you sure can be sure you're right. I mean, there are simple questions you can ask. Do I believe it for a good reason? Is there lots of evidence? These aren't hard questions, and especially for the religious mullahs and the rest of those nut jobs, those aren't hard questions to ask, and they know the answer is going to be no, because I believe it because my mommy told me so. Their answer isn't going to be a good answer. I had a personal relation. I saw God. I mean, these are things that should tell them, oh, well, maybe I'm nuts. yeah, because nobody else did that. They could ask the simple questions. Well, why doesn't God, if he does actually perform miracles, and there are saints, and there are all this bullshit, why do none of them ever grow somebody a new head or grow an arm, or none of that ever happens? They can't even cure baldness. Too ridiculous, really. So it was interesting in that sense that I didn't realize that he's basically saying there's nothing you can do to save humans, and there's nothing you can do to save animals, because anything you do is somehow a crime against their right to be living chaos, and you don't have any right to have any confidence in any ethics you describe. So you can't stop litterers, you can't stop people who make too much noise, because you can't be sure you're right. I mean, there's no absolute arbiter that has said you're right. You could argue it for decades and go to courts and you go to this, go to that, and we can't make a decision though, because nothing can be done, because decisions are always subject to some sort of scrutiny, as if you could possibly be wrong, which is of course always correct. Yes, you could possibly, but are you probably wrong? And that's all we can live in, is a probabilistic, pragmatic world. We can't live in utopias, where you have all knowledge. We can only live in the one where we have partial knowledge. And we have to make the best judgment we can make. And I've simply pointed out the best I can do as a brain in calculating is recognizing that I know torturing somebody else for your benefit is not acceptable. I know slavery is wrong. I mean, I know these things to be wrong. I know it's not efficient enough. It's, even evil. And I'm confident because there's just absolutely no evidence of anything else being the truth. All there is here is sentient brains, and all you're doing is saying there's two conditions they can be in, comfortable and uncomfortable, and it's not fair or decent or correct to pretend that you can put all your discomfort on somebody else and be comfortable. And that makes sense. No, it doesn't make any frickin' sense. So anyway, so it was, I just didn't realize, I mean, I did read his book, and maybe I read that part where he said we can't coerce. I didn't go back to my video where I reviewed the book to see if I heard that and said, well, shit, that's a non-starter, isn't it? What's the point of having the conversation if we can't do anything about it? Calling it immoral. Oh, well, we'll just call it immoral, and that'll be it. Yep. Littering be bad, but, can't do anything about it. Speeding be bad, can't do anything about it. Just tell the speeders, boy, that's nasty, you shouldn't do that. That'll work, right? I mean, that works all the time in society, right? Having absolutely no reward and punishment system works great, because people will just voluntarily do the right thing all the time. Oh, wait, yeah, that's satire. I was mocking it. Because that doesn't happen. All right, so maybe I will continue. I'll play some of the interview in this video. So anyway, the other video is 4 hours, but the first 2 hours is where I'm on the subject. The second 2 hours are just babbling with the chatters, so it doesn't have much relevance, I'm afraid. It's it's really just some personal crap, frankly. But whatever. What little I can safely reveal about my history on Earth. Anyway, so I guess I'll take a pause here, and I gotta go find the video, and we'll do some of that. I believe we will, eventually, when I come back, and such, so forth and whatnot. Alright, should be back and such. So let us begin. I downloaded it, so now there won't be any more commercials. But the commercials were just incessant. Just too silly.
Well, I think it matters how you bring about extinction, because killing off people and other animals is to do a very serious harm. It's to inflict a very serious harm, namely killing beings. Now, of course, there are philosophical views that deny that painless killing is bad, the Epicurean views. I just don't think that the balance of consideration and the rejection of Epicureanism is very...
All right, so I mean, this whole idea that obviously if there's no pain, you can't really argue that it's the harm in any kind of quantitative way, and you're just going to argue about some abstract harm, which would be somehow there's a bunch of unsatisfied desires, but there's nobody still having those desires, so it's really kind of silly. So yes, so he's defending a position. This is not say is kind of silly in the sense that you really can't defend some notion that you can harm something if it isn't hurt. So you can't really be harmed if you're not hurt. And people who die quickly or without even knowing it happened, it's it's kind of silly to argue that they were actually harmed. Frankly, it's just, I can't see any sense in arguing that there's a harm in not being able to finish your existence. The only way you can argue that's important is if you were vital to somebody else's welfare. But if you're not, so I mean, if there's no Martians on Mars, and so again the argument can be made, is there some sort of harm going on because they didn't get to live? So if you're going to kind of argue that dying quickly, being dead, is somehow a harm, that is a very hard argument to make. So it just doesn't mean much out of any social contract kind of argument. It doesn't mean anything in any kind of deep way to argue that it's a harm to be dead.
Widespread. It doesn't mean that it's true, but it does mean that most people are not going to think that you can just move from an anti-natalist to a pro-mortalist position.
So whatever pro-mortalist is, I just don't know. I still don't know what the hell it is. Why would anybody be pro-mortalist? It just doesn't make any sense. And it brings up another subject, which is obviously this whole conversation would be moot if we actually did find a cure for dying or death and people had a kind of immortality. It would be clear that you couldn't have reproduction and immortality because that would lead to a real population crisis. So yes, I'm sure people would be so much more willing not to have children if you just gave them, if you just pay them, with immortality. Then all of a sudden it's not going to be a crisis. All of a sudden they'll figure out that, I'm immortal. I can eat potato chips all day. I can do whatever the hell I want, blah, 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 blah. And, this whole conversation is then moot. If
you want to now defend killing people to bring about extinction.
So again, the whole subject really isn't about that. The subject is about the ideal. You want to just end the process. And you could argue that, it'd be really great if a giant meteor hit and just blew the whole thing to pieces in a few seconds. and none of us even knew what the fuck happened. I mean, you know, the people, most of the people killed by the nuclear bomb, right? They're killed really so fast. There's no way they could have a conscious experience of their own death. They are departicleized so quickly. And yeah, you could argue, well, yeah, if you got to go, that's the way to go. But again, getting to a subject about killing, you know, when that's not the subject, especially for humans. And then the argument is well, yeah, animals is another subject. And so for animals, you're not going to have some simple solution where you just persuade them to wear condoms. So that's not going to work. They're not going to do it voluntarily because they're not intelligent enough to do it voluntarily. That's a simple equation. It's not that complicated. And all you're really going to argue about is what's the most humane way to put them to sleep, so to speak. What's the most benign and graceful method of, you know, causing the lack of procreation.
You're going to have to jump over a lot of hurdles to do that.
So then, you know, what's the hurdle? I don't see any giant hurdles. You're just saying, we'll take the best we can get. You know, and that's the argument.
That, and those are not easy hurdles to clear. So I certainly think it matters how.
So again, we can't challenge him, right? The challenging remark to make to him would be, how many people would you be willing to kill to cure malaria? So if you had the opportunity to cure malaria, but the deal was 10,000 people have to be murdered, what would you do? And I would argue that you really don't have a logical choice. I mean, if you have any kind of sensible brain, you know the amount of harm those deaths are going to encompass is going to be nothing compared to what you're in for. So it's like if I could prevent World War II by killing 10,000 people. Oh, 10,000 versus 50 million. Yeah, I think that's a pretty easy equation to solve.
Extinction comes about.
What I've noticed in the antinatalism sphere is that there is a more, at least, I don't know if it's a vocal minority, but there's more conversation about pro-mortalism. And I'm just curious what you think about that.
Okay, at least maybe I'll find out what the fuck it is.
Well, I'm not sure I know of all the instances of the discussion that you're speaking about. I certainly have seen some in the philosophical literature. And I think it's absolutely fine to be raising those questions about whether antinatalism does imply pro-mortalism. There's been one author who has defended this in at least 2 papers, and I've responded on both those occasions.
We're clearly addicts, and so, you know, this idea that we want to die, or we would perceive it as being a good idea if we died because we're going to reduce our risk. If that's what pro-mortalism means, is you're better to get out right now because, you know, it's safer. That's clearly logical, but it doesn't have anything to do with anything pragmatic that a human being would feel or think. So why do we have to bother with that? We really don't need that. We just need people to stop reproducing. We don't need people to die. So I just don't see the argument of trying to change that delusion, okay, that you're always going to feel like your life is unfinished. And, you know, there really isn't a good day to die, you know, unless you're in extreme torment. So, you know, why bother arguing what we know to be just ego and, you know, mushy emotionalism rather than any kind of clinical thinking? So I would argue that even myself, I can't just sit there and say, well, yeah, if somebody said I have to die in 10 minutes, I'd be a little bit irritated because I really have stuff to clean up. I got stuff to do. I'm not finished enough yet.
To those arguments, and made the case that antinatalism does not imply pro-mortalism, even if it's the case that antinatalism plus some other view like perhaps ethics.
So why wouldn't you just say the asymmetry implies pro-mortalism? The asymmetry is basically saying your life is going to be a disaster. You know, that's just going to be a fact. It's going to be way too expensive. So you and all the things you're going to fuck up are better off being dead than being fucked up.
Epicureanism might have those implications. But there's a difference between antinatalism and some other view implying pro-mortalism.
So his antinatalism, let's just remember, it doesn't have anything to do with anything. It just has to do with the suggestion that you shouldn't rape women. And so I'm just talking, we're saying, okay, yeah, raping is bad. You shouldn't impose yourself. Imposing is bad. But we're not going to stop imposers. So we're not going to do anything to ensure that it will happen, because we're just going to say if you're a philosophical idiot or a lunatic or an asshole or a moron, we're going to let you own the territory. We're going to let you decide for us, because we aren't going to make any decision. We're not going to impose a decision. So he really is, I mean, you can't get more useless to the cause than to say, like even vegans. If vegans were to say, oh yeah, we have no intention of ever telling anybody they can't eat meat, well then they're never going to close the factory farms, because that just ain't going to happen.
And antinatalism by itself implying pro-mortalism. And it's that claim that I'm absolutely denying.
If people are, if there are some people that want to redefine or try to frame antinatalism not as a normative but as a descriptive, that
yeah, well, exactly. I don't know what this normative and descriptive, right? So they keep using all those technical jargony words, normative versus descriptive. What the fuck could that crap mean? The fact is they're basically saying it's some sort of thought crime, and if you don't have the proper thought crime, you didn't commit the crime. So they're basically saying if you're insane, you can kill anybody you want, because we can't imprison you or stop you or do anything because you didn't know what the hell you were doing. And somehow because you didn't know it was a crime, it's okay to commit the crime. I mean, it's that stupid.
coming into existence is a harm or a serious harm. And
Well, that's part of this conversation, right? Clearly, Benatar thinks that procreating is less of a crime than littering, or keying somebody's car, or shoplifting. It's not a crime you can legislate. It's not enough of a problem to require legislation. It's less than driving through an intersection, ignoring a stop sign. It's less of a crime than that. It's, that's in his opinion.
Grants that, yes, we can have the ethical claim, but that antinatalism should include the descriptive, because you need the descriptive to get to the normative. But if I just say that antinatalism can be the descriptive, would that be, well, I don't know.
I mean, it's just retarded. The conclusion isn't the evidence that you draw the conclusion from. So what's the point of a statement like this? Obviously, antinatalism isn't dogma. It's an explanation of why, the conclusion is drawn. And it's because it's too expensive and it's not your money.
Oh, like, what are your thoughts on that? If I just say antinatalism is the view that coming into existence is a harm or a serious harm.
I'd be worried about that for a few reasons. First of all, because of the word itself. Obviously, we don't take the natalism part too literally. I did speak about that at one point. But the anti, so you're against bringing into existence, that's more a claim about what you ought and ought not to do than a claim about whether coming into existence is harmful or not.
I mean, how could you possibly separate that is from the ought? So, I mean, if you've concluded it is bad, you shouldn't do it. That's just the logic. So I don't even know what the fuck he's doing now.
And the other point is that people can reach antinatalist conclusions via other routes. So they can do so, for example.
And it doesn't mean anything then, right? Because it's not philosophically useful. Because it's like somebody going to war to save the Jews and somebody going to war because he likes to kill people. Obviously the hero guy is useful in other purposes and has some, long-term, utility. Where the lunatic, when the war's over, he's just going to start shooting you.
By a risk argument or by a non-consent argument, And
yeah, there's a ton of arguments. That's the whole point. There's the argument from evolution, and then there's the argument from being civilized and recognizing you don't have a right to impose. You don't have a right to exploit. You don't have a right to take from something else. You don't have a right to eat other organisms' suffering, to consume it as part of your lifestyle.
And that need not rest on the view that coming into existence is always a net harm. So I
don't. What rests on what view? I mean, that's a pretty extreme statement, that coming to existence is always a net harm. Well, I would argue it's a net harm in the sense that, yes, if you're having a good time, you probably have made somebody else not have a good time.
I think it's perfectly fine to recognize that one route to antinatalism is this axiological asymmetry and its implications, including the view that it's always a net harm to come into existence.
So again, this asymmetry argument boils down to the fact that the goods are always eliminations of a negative. Winning the lottery is good because it gets you out of poverty, okay? It gets you out of a negative circumstance. It's always an advancement of a negative condition. It's always the improvement of an elementally negative condition. And that's it. There's no way to have double cupcake.
Practice a net harm to come into existence. But then let's just identify that as a separate claim that is sometimes used and sometimes not used to reach antinatalist conclusions.
I don't know what claim it would be, right? The only reason why you should be anti-natalist is because you understand there's no God. The function of our existence is pretty much mass murder, and that's it. You're just going to be killed, and it just matters that you'll either be killed well or you'll be killed badly, and deserve will have nothing to do with it, and there'll be lots of collateral and peripheral damage, especially if you're a procreator. You will cause, through probability, there's every likelihood, okay, you're creating monstrosities that will pay a very high price for your game playing.
Thank you. Okay, so the next topic I'd like to bring up is talking about this red button thought experiment and differentiating between smart.
So the only thing the red button is about is the intensity of your confidence and understanding of the severity of the problem. So if you understand the problem to be trillions and billions and just gigantic, and that there's a huge amount of torture at stake, then obviously if you fear you're never going to have another opportunity, you have to grab the opportunity when it arises. And so if the opportunity arises, I don't think you have a reasonable alternative just because of the gravity and the importance of the rescue mission. So, yes, you have to, if the button shows up, you have to hit it, okay, just because the magnitude of the decades or millennia of future suffering is gigantic. You're going to rescue, I mean, it's a zillion Holocaust rescue missions. The magnitude of the good is so huge that you cannot sit around and say, oh, well, the button showed up, now what should I do? And, waiting for the button, the opportunity to disappear. That you can't risk. That's all it was for. It was just illustrating my personal confidence and my statement that although I believe in social contracts, I believe in all this crap, I have no rational choice. I can't squander the opportunity because way too much is at stake.
Art's red button and Ephilism's red button. Steve, did you want to give a primer on this?
So basically, my understanding is that Smart's benevolent world exploder was explicitly both instantaneous and painless. But
well, of course, that would be the argument that if you have a red button, it's a real red button. It's not a, yellow-orange button.
Iffelism's red button, although it includes the benevolent world exploder, it also includes ending suffering at any cost. When
So again, the whole point, he just stated how there's not any cost. So the whole point is it's not a brown button. It's not a blood button. It's a as graceful as possible button. And, you know, in practical thought, it's, yes, you're being eviscerated as you would be eviscerated at ground zero in a nuclear explosion. There is no feasible, reasonable way you could contrive that the person could experience anything called torture. Their brain won't be able to do that.
people talk about the red button in antinatalist circles, I sometimes think the two get mixed up, and I think that most people feel, or most antinatalists believe.
Yeah, what the argument is again, I use the example of malaria and 10,000 people. And that's like a, you know, you could argue that over the next 10 years, you know, what, 10 million people, you know, might have their life damaged in some way. And some number, some hundreds of thousands, maybe a million, will, in fact, have their life substantially shortened by the disease. And so you're saying, okay, this is a trivial expense for that rescue. And the argument is that 8 billion people on planet Earth, yeah, that's a huge number. But again, if you just multiply the animal kingdom over 10 years of zillions of these animals living and dying in all these horrible ways, the magnitude is humongous. You can't even, you know, and so I don't, you really have to be fair to this argument and recognize that it's like one of these trolley questions where there's not going to be a good choice, and the simple truth is you can't rationally understand it any other way. Then you're just trading bad for bad. And you're going to take a little bit of bad to prevent a gigantic bad. And that has to be a reasonable thing to do. It's just, there's no, you don't have a choice but to understand that as reasonable. It's as logical as somebody saying, well, here, you pay me $10 and I'll give you $100. Well, duh.
That the red button means anything goes.
So again, no, it's not what it means. It doesn't mean they die over a 100-year period as slow as possible with little nails going in and out of their eyes. What the fuck is this asshole saying? Anything goes. Anything less bad than what nature is going to do in the next 10 years, yes, that goes. Anything less than what nature will do in the next 10 years goes. Because clearly we're going to be here longer than 10 years and blah, 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 blah. So you're going to be way the fuck ahead. And that's absolute draconian horror. That's as bad as it gets, what nature's going to do in the next 10 years. There's no way I could do it worse.
But there is an important distinction to be made between the benevolent world exploder and Iffelism's by any means necessary.
All right, so again, this is just such a lie. It was never stated as any means necessary. It was never stated, it doesn't matter how much you torture the people. It was just stated as a logical argument that if I could sacrifice myself and actually be tortured for an eternity, or let's say 1 trillion years, to save those people, I'd sign the contract. I'd say you have to do it. I don't have any goddamn choice. Because the fact is that my individual one object being tortured for 1 trillion years is going to be less suffering, okay, than the suffering you're imposing, asswipe.
Red button. Have I got that differentiation right, Professor? Smart's button.
So you're going to ask the professor who hasn't watched any of the videos and has no direct quotes indicating that anybody has suggested any means possible. That was never part of the argument. The argument was that it can be a pretty bad means. The means to an end, okay? I'm just saying the end of getting rid of Adolf Hitler, the means was goddamn expensive. Is somebody going to argue, well, we shouldn't have bothered? Is that going to be their argument?
Is only instantaneous and painless. Am I correct on that?
I think that's the paradigmatic case, yes. And he's advancing this as a criticism of negative utilitarianism, because he's saying, well, it would be an implication of negative utilitarianism that you should press the red button. And he takes that to be a reductio ad absurdum of negative utilitarianism.
Well, no, it's obviously the completely not absurd. It's always sensible to trade $10 for $100. It'll never not be sensible. If you can trade a stubbed toe for a cure for cancer, you do it. I mean, this isn't even nearly a hard value equation. And to pretend that these are all, oh, no, that's too soupy. I can't figure out what's going on. There's too many waves in that water, blah, 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 blah. No, that's as calm and clear as you can get it. So anyway, all right, we'll take a pause here and such and so forth and whatnot. So I'll be back later. All right, should be back. All right, so I was thinking about it. What I do when I've got some time off, I think about things. So I could just use the World War II example over and over again. Just say things like, okay, this is a philosophical thought experiment. What if, you were given the power to do this? An alien robot showed up, and he can, fix things, past, present, whatever, future. And so you're given the proposition that, you can change what happened in World War II. You can pay some moderate price, maybe not so moderate, undo all of those 50 million ruined lives, 50 million plus, all the orphans, all the stuff that happened that was just terrible, and, restore what they lost. And instead you have to sacrifice some other lives. So you can trade 50 million for 50 million, or maybe you can trade 50 million for 40 million, or maybe you could trade 50 million for 20 million. What number is where you stop and say it's not worth it? I mean, 20 million, 30 million, 40 million? I mean, realistically, isn't there just the simple argument that, well, you take whatever you can get. You get the best deal you can. And if the best deal is saving just 1 million, isn't that worth doing? I mean, you're not given a prospect that all things aren't going to be equal. And you could even be argued that, no, I'm going to make them even better, because the 40 million you're going to kill are going to die instantly, where the 50 million in the war didn't die instantly. Okay, there's slow death of bullet wounds, all kinds of being paralyzed, limbs blown off, all kinds of horrible crap. So I'm going to undo all that too. Not just the dead people, but all the disability and all the harm, lifelong injuries, the blindness, the deafness, all the stuff that was the peripheral, beyond just the 50 million dead. So you have to take the deals, don't you? So when somebody says at any cost, isn't that just the point to be made? And now we're talking about a case where, there's 8 billion people now. In 100 years, well, 70 years, let's say, into the future, there'll be another 8 billion. And another 70 years into the future, another 8 billion. Another 70 years into another 8 billion. So depending on what you think the prospects are for the future, and if you're supposed to be pro-life, then I would imagine you think we do have a prospect for a future. That's a lot that you're making a trade on, okay? Preventing 4 times, 5 times, 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times more misery. So you have 1,000 to 1 misery exchange. You pay $1, you get $1,000. And again, it can always be multiplied by the fact that, well, the exchange I'm making is the $1 is, an instant death versus, prolonged anguishing, slow death. I mean, are these really difficult questions? I mean, they're difficult in the sense it sucks, you know. Having a shitty choice and a really, 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 really shitty choice really sucks. But is it hard to make the choice between, yeah, you take shitty to avoid shitty squared or shitty cubed? Yeah, duh. So they shouldn't pretend that you know what we're bargaining. If you you know, it's just a fact. You either understand the dilemma or you don't. There's no compromising our opinions. You either think it's a good idea to put life on Mars or something, or you don't. You know, there's just no middle ground anywhere. And you know, one side's got to win, one side's got to lose. And you know, but these people ought to just declare themselves what they are, which is pro-lifers. I mean, Benatar doesn't, you know, he won't invest any pragmatic, rational statement in this philosophy. He will not, again, saying he will not coerce people is just saying it's not a crime. Even though he's calling it a moral crime, it's clearly he doesn't think it is. All right, so that's, you know, a reiteration of the point. Yeah, that what they're talking is nonsense in the context of what we're really talking about, what we're playing for here, and the magnitude of the future torment that either will be or won't be, depending on how reasonable people are willing to be to have this conversation.
Libertarianism. I mean, that's a theoretical implication. So now we need to think about, is antinatalism committed, at least theoretically, to either the benevolent world exploder, as you've imagined?
I don't know why everybody has to turn everything into some weird benevolent bombing, blah, blah, exploder, whatever that is. You know, I mean, obviously the whole point would be is to be benevolent, to do it as harmlessly as possible. There's absolutely no argument that there's some profit in doing it sloppy or messy. No argument.
Or to some other much more painful way of bringing about the end of all suffering.
The argument is yeah, but if that's all you've got and it's still 1,000 to 1, if it's just as painful and it's 1,000 to 1, well, it doesn't make any difference. Yeah, it's a shittier choice, so it's shittier against, you know, it's quite shitty, you know, compared to, again, shitty to the power of, you know, 48.
And what I've said is I don't think antinatalism does imply that, because antinatalism doesn't require you to inflict the harm of death on people.
All right. So again, and that's not what the point is. Is it frankly, if you want to be pragmatic and rational, you would have to understand that they're not all going to. That there's nothing in this world that 100% of people will agree on. So there's always going to be people who like raping, and they're going to vote against laws against raping. So it's, you know, you're inevitably stuck with some resistors. And you shouldn't just pretend that's not going to be a reality. But it's really not the equation. The equation is that, yes, you know, in most cases, this will be something overtly and willfully done by humans and done gracefully as possible. There's just no need for any jihading.
Per se, it doesn't do that. You're going to have to make a whole bunch of other arguments, as we were discussing earlier, to link antinatalism with a justification of that kind. And
all right, so he's saying you're going to have to make a whole bunch of arguments to justify doing something about criminal behavior. So either you believe it is criminal to impose torture, And if you do, then you think it's a real crime, and it has to be discouraged. And it's just the fact. You got to discourage it.
I think that those intermediate arguments don't work for numerous reasons, including the ones I was advancing earlier about fallibility. That
Credibility? I don't know what that was.
This is immensely self-confident to
Okay, so again, everything is immensely self-confident. Again, I just don't understand how you can act without recognizing that you've done the proven beyond reasonable doubt trialing. So I've had the trial in my brain, you know, and it's decisive. There's no evidence for the defense. Okay, the defense of life. There's just no evidence. Evolution is in fact a mass murderer. It does in fact, cause. Is just as brutal and as bad a design of a system as you could possibly get, and making things for the very purpose of abusing them and killing them, so you can have an evolution, a gladiator war that makes better gladiators, so that you can breed better gladiators. It's puppy farm on steroids. It's just as bad as it can get. And what's the trial evidence on the other side? What's the defense of evolution? God done it? Well, that's silly and irrational. So what's the point? Is there any other argument? It's not evidence, but I'm just saying, is there any other argument except people are going to just say, no, I don't want that truth to be true. That's it. That's all they got as an argument. I don't like it. It's not the truth I want. It's not the universe I want to live in. Well, too bad.
You believe that you can't possibly be wrong, and so you justified in inflicting at least all this death.
So again, we do this all the time, where we pass pretty draconian laws in some cases for things that we know it just can't possibly be permissible behavior. So again,
that perhaps also vast amounts of suffering simply because you believe.
Okay, so and there's just no evidence that there's vast amount of suffering, that this is a certain failure experiment. No, this is a certain success. The ratio of 1,000 to 1 means, wow, this is really hard to fuck up. There's just no way you can make this decision messier than like I said, the circumstance that exists. You cannot do to sentient beings anything, okay, worse than what nature's going to do to them. It's just not possible to contrive a way of creating the means to your end that would be a worse means than the one nature already has in place.
That you could prevent more suffering in the long run by doing that.
It's just surprising that after I just don't see how Benatar has any credibility as somebody you would consider an antinatalist advocate. He's just run away from the whole subject.
That isn't. It's unlikely to be in practice the way it would work, and also it is.
So there's no unlikely. No, it's very likely. Just like it's very likely we could have a right to die policy that would be insanely efficient, that would save the economy trillions of dollars, and human beings would be hugely benefited by not suffering pointlessly. There's just no way to do that wrong either. There's wrong enough. There's no way to do it wrong enough where you say, oh, there's some danger, we'll fuck it up. We can't fuck it up worse than the circumstance that exists now.
Sort of morally problematic in my view because of the degree of infallibility that you...
So he said this about 17,000 times now in this video, right? Well, okay, 5 times. That somehow we just can't be sure. We can't know that. Oh no, it's too dangerous. We can't walk across this. This is a little trickling stream. And he's saying, oh, no, there's a risk. Well, you get your foot in there and that current takes you right down. You know, that 1 inch of water, you know, it can do all kind of undertow. You know, no, this is bullshit rhetoric. You know, that there's some horrible threat of absolute disaster. No, there isn't. Again, how do you have a bigger disaster than World War II? Come on, get serious. And look at all the disasters we're walking right into right now. The pro-lifers, the pro-breeders, the let's just keep doing what we're doing. You know, because global warming, you know, nobody's ready for it, okay? And it's going to be so disruptive. And humans are going to, yeah, they're going to be killing each other over it. That's the future. People having kids, that's the future they're going to give their kids.
Contribute to yourself in making a decision of that kind.
Yeah, and I think also going back to the definition of antinatalism, the view that it's morally wrong to bring sentient...
So again, the view that it's morally wrong, I wish they just not use this stupid rhetoric. It's not about what kind of wrong it is, whether it's morally wrong or some kind of bullshit adjective. It's wrong. And we should stop it because it's wrong. So it's bad. That's even that simple word you could use. It's bad to procreate. We should stop it.
Beings into existence. Going from that to even to the benevolent world exploder, you need a whole lot of working to get from that.
So let's just say you don't need any working at all. It's just as simple as you can make it in terms of a value equation. This is the realistic prospect for the future for humans and animals. This is going to be what's being imposed. And it's just, again, it's 1,000 to 1. It's 1,000,000 to 1 exchange. You can't mess this up. You put $1 in the machine, and the machine's going to spill out $1 million.
To the benevolent world exploder. And then when you add on by any means necessary annihilation, you need even more.
So again, whatever that means, by any means necessary means, well, yeah, it has to be less bad than what that future is going to be. So we know the future is going to be bad. Everybody's going to die, okay? And we know that it's going to be bad for lots of, you know, in terms of the chaos and unpleasantness that's going to be experienced through that process. And we know that continues on and on and on. It doesn't happen just once. It happens again and again and again and again. It reoccurs over and over and over and over again. In the case of the benevolent blah, blah, blah bomb, it's over once and you never do it again. So it's one bad. So on top of it being less bad, it's also less number of bads. So you really can't lose here. Even if you created a one-time event that's worse than one generation of what nature will do to the animals in the next 100 years, you got the benefit of knowing, well, you prevented the second one and the third one and the fourth one and the fifth one and the sixth one. So even if you fuck up horribly, the fact that their badness was going to keep being reoccurring and that your one badness will not reoccur. It'll be a one-time event. World War II. Nature's going to give you multiple World War IIs.
More steps.
Exactly. So, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so that's how far removed...
Look, Benatar's agreeing with Godfrey. So, I mean, is there any more evidence that anybody needs that these people that have no interest at all in ever seeing a future with less sentient life in it? There's just no way these clowns want to see that future.
It is from antinatalism.
Correct. And so just give to one illustration, let's imagine you are both an antinatalist and a rights theorist, and you think that people...
Oh, whatever a rights theorist is. So that's a thing? Do they make T-shirts? I'm a right theorist. Is it a thing? I bet you it's not a thing. I bet you nobody has that fucking T-shirt, Benatar. I'm a rights theorist. Hilarious.
But have a right not to be killed, not to be murdered.
So again, we're talking about procreation, and they just keep wanting to talk about murder for some crazy-ass reason. Because they have an agenda, right? They don't want to talk about the real subject. They want to pretend the real subject is the ethalists and the anti-natalists are going to kill you. No, they're not.
Well, you don't get led then from antinatalism to the benevolent world exploder, because the rights of people not to be murdered is going to block that move.
I don't even know what that means. The rights of the people not to be murdered. What does that even mean? What did he just say? What kind of babble was that? So you believe you can act, and then you don't act for some reason. I don't know. What did he just say? But, I mean, clearly these are people who don't think it does any good to create social policies, to create outcomes. And, of course, that works. Social incentives work.
Now, you may argue that rights view is incorrect, but that requires an argument. It's not just a direct implication from antinatalism.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with you.
Of course you would agree, but that was just as much babble as I've consumed in this entire year. What the hell was any of that? What the fuck was that little exchange about? What was it? What did they just say? I have no idea.
Well, this is going on. Like, if you were to ask the hypothetical, and I think this was one of the criticisms with your interview with George Martin. Some people were saying that. So
he had interviews with lots of these shitheads. Okay, I'm sure he won't have one with me. Because he's not gonna. He's gonna come out looking as irrational as Piro. Yeah.
In the hypothetical, if we grant the that you could eliminate all life, and there's two cases. One where you have this type of black button where it's the extreme suffering for 24 hours and then it all ends. And then,
so why would you invent that button anyway? But whatever. 24 hours seems a little extreme. You really don't need to do that.
And you have this red button, which...
It's pretty hard to injure somebody where they're going to die in 24 hours. Yeah, that's a little, that's a little tricky.
Well, I mean, technically it would entail, like, an F-less red button would allow for this this to end. If you grant the hypothetical, then would it not follow from a total consequentialist point of view? Because you are ending all life, therefore you're breaking the cycle, therefore all suffering ends.
But notice...
And the reoccurrence ends. So it could be 1,000 years, it could be 5,000 years worth of suffering, it could be 1,000,000 years worth of suffering. Could be an awful lot of suffering saved. And I'm just saying, does anybody realistically think we have much of a future before that's going to be so dystopic, that somebody will do it a messy way? If we don't do it on purpose, we were going to do it in some really ugly way where we nuke each other, we make a real horrible mess out of any notion of civilization, and that we can't put the technology back in the box, and we will drone each other out of existence. Well, the drone war is going to be a lot fucking more ugly, okay, than anything the ethalists are proposing.
What you've done there is you first of all asked whether it's an implication of consequentialism, which is different from whether it's an implication of antinatalism.
So it's just he's just asking you, this is the pragmatic end results. In one case you have this, and in the other case you have this. Now you tell us why that choice is bad. That's all. Show us the reasoning you're using to say this case, completed and done. You explain how this case is worse than your reoccurrent case of absolute horror reoccurring. Explain how the $1 million number, okay, isn't a million times worse than the $1. Go ahead, explain that.
Yeah, if I'm a consequentialist and an antinatalist, then to me, I mean, I'm not actually arguing this, but then...
Yeah, he's like, oh yeah, well, I think it's a convincing argument, but I don't actually argue it because I'm full of shit and want to, placate bullshit because I'm trying to sell candy bars.
Yeah, it seems it would entail, or I could see people arguing that, go for the red button.
Yeah, but we've got to be clear about what's having this implication. So if somebody tells me that negative utilitarianism has that implication, and they might even tell me that negative...
Pragmatic economics has that implication. Yeah. You pay $1,000 to get $1 million worth of work done. Yeah, you take that bargain.
Utilitarianism might have the implication that you can press the red button even if it involves some suffering, as long as the amount of suffering that it causes is less than the amount of suffering that you prevent through the pushing of the button.
Right. So again, and just imagine what the prevention you're preventing is. Like I said, it's a reoccurring absolute horror. So it's again, it's World War II over and over again 1,000 times.
You tell me all that's a theoretical implication of negative utilitarianism. I'll say, okay, well, that's an implication of negative utilitarianism. It doesn't tell you that's an implication of antinatalism. So that's the first.
I mean, so of course, the core is of any of one of these philosophies is the utilitarian part, whether it's negative or not. You have to be pragmatic, and all that's really saying is that you have to do the value equation. I mean, that's all the utilitarian part means. So you have to do that comparison, and you have to go with whatever comparatively is the better outcome, and that's all it is. You're just saying what comparatively is the better outcome. Clearly, we're not trying to maximize pleasure, we're trying to minimize torture. So you'll just look at the two circumstances and say which one minimizes torture by 1,000,000 times. Yeah. I mean, there is a cavern of difference between the two outcomes. They are not the same outcome. They're not even close to the same outcome. They're a gigantic difference in outcomes. Bazillions dead versus 1,000,000 dead. That kind of argument.
Point. The second point is there's a slippage that goes on where people want to note that in the hypothetical you could press the red button, or you should press the red button, and then somehow they want to draw real-world implications from the hypothetical. It just...
I mean, what's the point? The whole point of the hypothetical is to practice real world. It's where you're doing your practicing. So before I do it for real, I'm going to go to court and have a mock trial. I'm going to test the arguments. I'm going to test the theory. So that's all that is. You're basically just saying, okay, let's, figure it out. Let's see if it works. And the simple math just adds up. Yes, it just 2 + 2 = 4. Yep, we're done.
Because it's true in a hypothetical case doesn't mean to say it's true in the real world.
Oh, okay. So again, there's absolutely no evidence that there's nothing in the hypothetical that's denying anything substantive that exists in the real world, unless you think souls exist, or unless you think angels exist, and we didn't account for the angels. Aren't going to, you can't blow up an angel. The pixies have radiation shields. I don't know what the hobgoblins live in the center of the earth, and they can't be. What's the added? What feature are you saying is missing from the hypothetical that makes it unrealistic or a fantasy? The hypothetical intends to represent the facts accurately. There's no will to misrepresent the facts. So again, he's just grasping at any excuse to run the fuck away from the subject. This guy is not a hero. Alright, so that might be enough for now. And maybe I'll do the rest in a live room. And so there'll be a live room sandwich with this video in the middle. Yeah, this will be the meat. Ooh. No, this will be the lettuce and tomato and such of the sandwich. I actually had a little tomato sandwich the other day. Quite good. I don't eat that much bread, so, you know. So it was the bread event. The tomatoes I eat every day, but the bread event was the, bread is good. Anyway, enough of that. Yeah, we'll call that a video, and so till the next time and such and so forth and whatnot. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, good enough. I mean, it's just so, I really didn't think, you know, I've been disappointed. Like I said, I was disappointed when David Benatar, he had his real opportunity with Sam Harris, and he just totally failed in that debate. And then ever since then, he hasn't said a damn thing to make me feel like he's any kind of advocate at all. All right. Anyway, I mean, he's the anti-advocate. He's the anti-Christ or whatever. You know, he's the. If this philosophy has a virus, you know, that's trying to kill it, this Benatar character is a virus. It's not going to do us. It's not going to do the health of the cause any good. He's a really bad spokesman. Okay, so till the next time and such and so forth and whatnot. Yeah, that's the end. Okay. Miss me.